Good evening, everyone. I'm Drew Taylor Moore, Business Litigation Associate at Thompson Coburn and co-chair of Thompson Coburn's LGBTQ plus Affinity group. So first, working in a law firm that was solely committed to clients and community was important to me. I think the millennials in the room recall being in that transition period before gay or lesbian marriage was a reality, and when coming out too early resulted in abuse and negative attention. And in some ways, we're still there. But when I was finishing law school, I wanted to work in a law firm that embraced diversity and had LGBTQ plus mentors who epitomized professionalism and mastery of their professional skills on top of their sexual identities. And Thompson Coburn is that place. In 2014, Thompson Coburn, which is based in St. Louis, voices support to add workplace protections to LGBTQ plus employees to its human rights statute. And it's always, for the past 12 years, and as long as I've been a part of this firm, it's earned a perfect score on HRC's Corporate Equality Index. So we're totally committed to diversity over here. And when I first broached the possibility of having Judge Quinn speak to us, everyone at Thompson Coburn was completely supportive and excited to have her here. So on behalf of Thompson Coburn, I thank you all for making the time to join us for evening tea with Judge Jill Rose Quinn. And before we start, I also serve on the Leadership Council of Citywide Pride. Citywide Pride has been acting as a networking and professional development tool for Chicagoland LGBTQ plus professionals since around 2002. And as soon as I found out about this organization, I was driven to join. It's a professional network whose members are out proud and they're driven to make meaningful connections and make their workplaces more inclusive. Citywide Pride gives its members and the community a way to pay it forward by magnifying the reach of their events and ensuring that there's mentorship and support for LGBTQ plus professionals throughout the Chicagoland and Illinois area. If anyone is interested in joining the Leadership Council, shoot us a line on the website at citywidepridechicago.org. So now I can begin. Judge Quinn has been kind enough to share a personal and professional experience with us. And before we start, I'm going to cover a couple of housekeeping items. First, this is an interactive program, so we encourage you to submit your questions during the program. You can submit questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your window. If you have questions during the webcast, you can also submit them using the Q&A widget, and we'll try to answer these during the webcast, but we'll respond by email if a fuller answer is needed or we run out of time. We'll try to get through every question during this program. If your screen freezes or you encounter any other technical issue, try to press F5. That will refresh the screen and fix most of those issues. But if you continue to have problems, just send a note using that Q&A widget, and we'll assist you to the best we can. Now for the official introduction. Judge Jill Rose Quinn graduated from the State University of New York and started working as a community organizer before coming to Chicago and obtaining her law degree from John Marshall Law School. After law school, Judge Quinn practiced in Bloomington, Illinois, before bringing her energy and expertise to Chicago. In Chicago, Judge Quinn became well known for her keen intellect and ability to master multiple areas of law. She's been active in the Chicago community as a neighborhood lawyer and entrepreneur for years, operating her own law firm and dealing with more areas of law than many attorneys ever even touch. She's involved with the LGBT Chamber of Commerce, the Lesbian and Gay Bar Association of Chicago, and has contributed a lot of time and energy to furthering education and understanding of LGBTQ causes throughout Illinois, and especially Chicago. In 2002, before trans issues were fully understood, before gay marriage was even officially legalized nationwide in Obergefell v. Hodges, Judge Quinn transitioned and had to deal with being on the far end of the learning curve our nation was going through at the time. In some ways, we're still going through that. And for that, we really appreciate Judge Quinn joining us for this hour-long session of evening time tea to share some of her experiences, both personal and professional, and give her thoughts on furthering the cause of equality in our nation and especially in Chicago. So please join me in welcoming Judge Quinn. Hi, Judge Quinn. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much for that introduction. Just as one little point to add, I just wanted to mention that I've become a member since joining the bench. I've become a member of the Alliance of Illinois Judges, which is an organization, and it's called the Alliance because it's the alliance of straight Illinois judges and LGBTQ plus judges. And it's good to know that that Illinois, Cook County is far-reaching enough to have such an organization. And I'm really proud to be part of the bench of Cook County.
Well, I mean, we'll just start with basic questions. You know, I was part of the judicial evaluation process, so I knew a little bit about your background. In fact, I remember meeting you. This was when I first started practicing, and you were first doing the rounds of seeking the bench. And what I recall is every member that I spoke to was just completely complimentary toward your professionalism, your intelligence, and your background. And I think for a lot of our members, a lot of our audience members who are not attorneys, one question that non-attorneys ask is, what inspired you to become a lawyer in the first place?
Well, when I was younger, so I was born in 1954, grew up, really came of age, became cognizant of what was going on during the 60s, during the civil rights movement. And during that period of time when we told ourselves that we were rebellious and revolutionary and forward-looking. So I truly believed in the civil rights movement as it came to pass. And I truly believed that changes need to be made in the political system and the economic system to make things fairer for people, especially people of color, people who are in marginalized groups, and people who were economically disadvantaged. And I recall saying to my father that, you know, Dad, when I grow up, I want to be a lawyer and I want to represent people and I want to sue all those rich folks that are taking advantage of everybody. My father looked at me and shook his head and said, "You're going to be broke." And but I did it anyway. But that's what inspired me. I mean, I had a powerful sense that if you were going to change society, if you're going to make things better, then law was the way to do it, because law is the basis of everything in society.
And you mentioned coming up during the civil rights era. Is there any particular person who was an advocate or, you know, a representative during that time that you looked up to as an inspirational figure or role model? Well,
I really liked Bobby Kennedy. I really liked Martin Luther King. His oratory, his life, the way he fought with the passion that he had, those things were inspiring to me. And I wanted to make sure that I had the opportunity, or I wanted to try to point my life into living with that kind of passion.
So what does being a judge mean to you? I mean, I mentioned before that during the evaluation process, it's actually quite arduous. It can take years of setting yourself up, and you go through multiple rounds of applying and then having to come back the year afterwards. So I think it'd be helpful for you to explain what it means to you, why you sought out the judgeship, a bench in the first place, and just outline what that process looks like for some of our viewers.
So as a practicing attorney, I think that when you're in the field, when you're in the streets like I was practicing law, you always look up to judges as being someone who can do more than you in the law. I mean, I think it's always a role that you look at with respect. When I first started considering being a judge, I had been out practicing as a transgender attorney for, I don't know, maybe 7 years or so, 7, maybe 10 years. I never thought that I would be accepted either by the electorate or by the bench as an associate, hired as an associate attorney. I just never thought that would happen. In 2012, I went to my first national LGBT Bar Association meeting, and I met the Honorable Phyllis Fry, who had been just appointed judge in Houston in, I think, 2010 or 2011. And Judge Fry, as I mentioned in our conversation before, Drew, Judge Fry was an openly transgender practicing attorney in Harris County in Houston, Texas, in the 70s, in the late 70s. And she's a woman of tremendous courage. She had crosses burned on her lawn. She had her windows broken. She had all kinds of things happen to her. And with the inspiration of her wife, she persevered, and she became ultimately of a prestigious enough position to be asked to sit on the municipal bench in Harris County. So I met her for the first time. She'd been a judge for a while, and also I met Vicki Kolakowski, who was an elected judge in Alameda County, which is where Oakland is in California. And Judge Fry said, Jill, you have to get out of stealth mode. You have to be visible. You have to show people who we are. You have to be a judge. And I took that to heart. And instead of using being transgender as being a negative thing, I turned around being a positive thing. And I said, you know, I said, there's not a single transgender judge on the bench. So people who are transgender look to the bench and they don't see it as a legitimate institution because they're not included, they're not represented. So when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Somebody else said that before me, and I think that's a pretty smart thing to do. So once I flipped the script and looked at that a little differently, I saw that as an advantage. And I started telling people, I started making that the first step in my pitch, so that when I first started to apply as an associate attorney, I put that right in the front of my application. Is there anything you should know that would make us look at your application in a different light? And I would say, I'm openly transgender. I've been practicing law for 30, 35, whatever it was at the time. So again, that was how I approached it. And the same thing when I decided to run for judge. I just, we can get into the process of how it is to run for judge later, but I viewed it as being important for the transgender community for me to be a judge. And that made it important for me to run.
And we were discussing this briefly before, but we are all in this strange transition period where I think when you get a little bit older and you're moving forward in your life and career, you look back and you realize, all these transition periods, it's all organic. There's never ever a clear demarcation between one generation and the next. And I remember when I was growing up, I didn't think gay attorneys existed. I mean, when I was growing up, gay marriage wasn't there. I mentioned that before. I thought that, if you were in a same-sex relationship, you would be ostracized or you would, be inflicted with some incurable disease. And, when we're talking about going out there and becoming role models, and I talked to partners over at Thompson Coburn, we all seem to mirror what you're saying. I remember I had to make that decision too.
Right.
What am I going to put on my firm profile? What am I going to do in my community to show people, to pick up the ball and run with it? We'll help you remove the barriers. You're going to have to live your life and fight your battles, but
right.
We're going to be there. I think what you said just really strikes a chord with that. You do have to be out there and visible. And I think for a lot of our audience members, especially the Citywide Pride members, that's why we do what we do. You're in your organizations. You can sit there and be quiet and just be a private citizen. But, what do you really progress and what type of rights will we ever cement if we don't stand out there, be outspoken, and really claim our rights to be considered full citizens? So it's not really a question. But what you said is just, I think that's why your application stood out to me. I think it's often unknown or unclear how many judges seek the bench with a strong vested interest in their communities, whether it's be the LGBTQ plus community or some religious or other ethnic community. Almost all of them extremely smart professional attorneys, but there's some fire in there to give back in some way and to be a role model. And I think that's what we look for people on the bench. And I think that's why your application stood out so clearly. But just for our audience, I'm going to go back to this because you had mentioned it before. It is a long and arduous process. So can you outline what you had to go through to actually, set yourself up all the effort you put into it, the things that you need to do to make sure you achieve the level of respect and notoriety among the attorney community to proceed in your application?
Okay, well, so the first thing that you have to do is you have to download the application to become a judge. And the application to become a judge, it will surprise you the first time you see it. It's like 57 pages. And they ask you for information. They ask you for the names of people. I don't know if the application from the court asked this, but I know that the Chicago Bar Association, for their evaluation, they ask you pretty much for the names of everybody who's ever worked in every practice you've ever been in. And I didn't have that checkered a career, but I did work for 4 different law firms. And to try to remember the names of all the secretaries and all the associates and how to get a hold of them. Some people were dead and all that stuff. But so that's one thing. And I would just point out, I know there are young attorneys in the audience, and I would just tell you that right now, if you have any idea that you would ever like to apply for to be a judge or to run for office or to seek a higher level position in government, you should get yourself a composition book now and write down every case you handle, the name of your opponent, what the case is about, what kind of novel pleadings you might have drafted, and just a few notes, just so you have it there. And trust me, you don't want to be filling out that judicial application 2 days before the deadline and having go into storage to look out. You're looking for cases and emails that you got from somebody 20 years ago. So that's one thing I would tell you, because it is quite a lengthy application. So you fill out an application, you submit that. There are 3 different ways to become a judge. You can become an associate judge by being hired by the Cook County judges, by the chief judge with the nominating committee. You can run for judge by running for office. Either in Cook County, you probably want to get connected to the Democratic Party, and the other thing is you could become appointed to be a judge, to fill out a judge's term when that judge retires midterm, and then you have to run to get another term. So as an associate, you have to apply, you have to interview with the nominating committee, impress the nominating committee enough to make the short list. When you make the short list, and so if there are 30 positions open, there's a short list of 15. And if you make the short list, it becomes your duty in 3 weeks or 4 weeks to talk to every sitting circuit judge and try to enlist that circuit judge to support you when you are to be elected by the nominating committee or by all the judges. And that's a really daunting prospect. And this past year, I remember watching all the associate judge candidates scurry around and trying to meet every judge, going to every function, roaming the halls at Rolling Meadows and Bridgeview and Maywood, trying to talk to circuit judges. But I don't know if that's as daunting as the process of running for election. I'm sure for me, running for election was actually easier because I really did like meeting people. After a while, I really did like meeting people and talking to them and shaking hands. And I worked with my wife, my campaign manager, who's now my wife, in figuring out the best way to approach people. But the process is basically this. You should get to know someone in your local government. The Democratic committee manager in Cook County, a few Democratic community managers. You should get involved in some political action and get somebody to be your friend who's a committeeman or committee person. And then at some point, the committee persons meet. There's usually a training session offered by the county as to how to go about running for judge. It's like an afternoon session. You go before the committee to be the 50 committeemen and the 30 township committeemen. So there's 30 townships in Cook County and 50 wards in Cook County, and they all vote on who the slate of Democratic candidates are going to be. So you have to appear initially before the committee, and then again, you've got a period of about 6 weeks when you have to try to meet all 80 of these representatives to try to let them know who you are. You probably need someone to help you. You probably need a political expert to help you. That's a good idea. And then once you get slated by the Democratic Party, your job gets easier by about, I'd say, 50 to 60%. There are always a number of other people who will try to run against you, but the slating gives you a big advantage in terms of sending out mailings. So then you get slated, you run in the primary. If you win the Democratic nomination in Cook County, that's pretty much it. Some of the judicial sub-circuit seats, there is Republican opposition, and those I sort of feel bad for those people because they have a 2-year run instead of a year run. And recently we had one that went right down to the last day before swearing in, before that was actually decided who was going to be the judge in that sub-circuit. But anyway, that's really the process. Also in that process is you have to go to as many meetings as you can, meet as many people, meet as many voters, get petitions signed to get on the ballot, and really sacrifice pretty much most of your life. It's like having 2.5 part-time jobs, and if you're working at the time, the job that you're working becomes the half job. But that's the process I went through, and that's it. It takes a while. It takes time. It takes commitment. It takes a really good sense of humor.
Well, you had mentioned before that you actually enjoy going out there and meeting people. I definitely believe that. I mean, what part of this entire process, though, was the most challenging for you, and how did you handle that?
Well, juggling my practice and juggling the campaign process was pretty challenging because I did have an active practice. I was the only I'm the only attorney in my office. I didn't have a secretary, so pretty much all my files I have to manage at the same time running for office. While I say that I do enjoy meeting people, it took me about 6 months to get to that point. And I mean, there was a period of time when I would go to a function, I would get my Diet Coke, and I would maybe sort of meet one person, and then I would call my campaign manager, my fiance at the time, my wife now, and I would say, "Can I come home?" And she would say, "No, you have to meet 5 people before you can come home." And so I would go and I would meet 5 people, and by accident, maybe I'd meet a couple more. And then after a while, we kind of got into the swing of it, and I met more and more people, and I got to be good at it.
Would you say your wife is the ally most instrumental to your success then?
She's my heart. She's my everything. She was, yeah, I'll say that. She's sitting here. I'll say that. But and it's true.
I guess we're getting to the tea portion of the event, speaking tongue in cheek. I'm just curious about some of the personal challenges that you faced, with the decision to transition. And, I think everybody in the room understands what a major decision that is. I mean, there are people in our community who they would want to go through that entire experience and just lead a private, quiet life and not really be called out and stay out of the limelight. But you're making a very different decision. I think almost every attorney has to make that decision. Are you going to be quiet and just lead a good, comfortable life? Are you going to get out there and be a spokesperson, a role model? But just going back to the main question, what led you to make the decision to transition way back in 2002?
Well, I've known that I was a woman since I was 4 years old. If any of you have had a conflict of gender identity, you'll understand this and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. but it's basically like being at war constantly between factions in your mind and factions in your body. And it is the prospect of coming out and telling someone that you're a member of what they perceive as the opposite sex, your opposite sex, is so daunting that you would do almost anything not to do it. I mean, a lot of people hide away. A lot of people, turn to, substance abuse. A lot of people, like I did, just force it down. Just, shove it down and hold it down as much as you can. And you go through a period of transition in your life where, for several years it'll be prominent and you can't fight it. And then for a couple of years, you're okay. And then for a while you can't fight it. And so from the age of 4 until the age of about 44, that's what my life had been. It had been fight, fight, fight. And I realized that, you know what? This has been the one constant in my life. This has been the one thing that I said, if only I could change this, if only this was right, then my life would be okay. And I realized that that it was so fundamental to me, because you don't know when you're operating in society, when you have this conflict, you don't know if you're presenting who you are or you're presenting who you're pretending to be. It's exhausting. So I came to the conclusion that it was, if I were to continue to not live as a woman, it would be like just crossing off days on a calendar until I died. And I wasn't going to, go to the end of the road without changing, without living to be my authentic self. There's again, I don't mean to quote Wayne Dyer too much, but Wayne Dyer says, "Don't die with your music still in you." I wasn't going to die with my music still in me. I wanted to be who I was. The hardest part of that was my relationship with my daughter, and that relationship suffered. I was recently divorced in part because of this conflict, and my daughter and I struggled through that. And we had a strong basis. So ultimately, and we did. I mean, I didn't pick the greatest time in the world for her to transition. She was 13 years old. She was in 8th grade. That's not a wonderful time for a young woman. And so she's struggling. I'm struggling. And ultimately, after a while, she came to accept that I was still her parent. I was still the same person she could count on, and we resolved our differences. And today, our relationship is really strong. So that was hard. Professionally, it was less difficult because, as I tell people, and people in the listening in the audience from the chamber, I tell people that I didn't have to make that long walk down the hallway to human resources and say, "Hey, listen, I'm going to transition to female. Can you change my name on my door plate? And can I have new business cards? And I want to use the ladies' restroom." So I didn't have to do that, but I did have 150 clients, and ultimately I realized that I had to tell those clients that I was transitioning. I was going to practice as a woman. I was going to be their lawyer still, and my name was going to be Jill, and I was going to fight for them just like I always had. And 85 to 90% of my clients stayed. That's because, again, I realized that people either were going to accept me or they were going to reject me. That was their choice. Everybody has that choice. Just like, everybody has the choice to believe some political philosophy that's crazy. But they had the choice, and I wasn't going to be dissuaded from my destiny because I feared what someone thought. So and practice after that, it wasn't really it wasn't really a struggle because I was living authentically. The women in the audience will nod their heads when I tell them that I learned what mansplaining was. There would be times when I would be at a real estate closing or courtroom, and I would earnestly tell people what the best thing to do was, and some man would say, "I'm going to ask somebody else," or "No, you should do it this way," and they would, because it was said in a deeper voice, they believed that voice instead of mine. That was something I learned, and that was something I learned to work around. If you work harder, you persevere. If you come from a position of love, you prevail. You survive. I have very few difficulties with judges. I had one negative experience with a judge and one positive experience with a judge. Actually, several positive experiences with judges. And when I was running for the bench, I had a lot of positive experiences with judges who said they really wanted to see me practice because they really wanted to see the bench be more diversified. So it was a lot less scary in execution than it was in anticipation. And I think that if I were to give anybody any advice about anything, I'd say be honest with yourself, live your life authentically, and don't look back.
And that's very interesting because it makes me think of some critics of just the LGBTQ community in general. Some of these critics suggest that any element or any aspect of your sexual identity, your gender identity, all of that should remain private. It should be stuffed into a closet somewhere, so you can be open to your friends and family, but they say, don't bring it into the office. We don't need to know about that. What do you say to those critics?
Is this a family audience?
I think we're all adults here.
No, I think I would say, well, Chief, thank you very much for your opinion, but you're wrong. I don't just live with my family and friends. I don't just live in the study in my house. I live everywhere, and this is who I am. And take me as you find me, and if you don't like it, then go. People are entitled to their opinions. You just have to make sure that you stay true to yourself, and don't lose confidence in yourself.
And you had mentioned before kind of coming out to your current clients, while you're managing your practice. And just as related to the last question, so do you share your trans identity with new clients, or did you share your trans identity with new clients who might not have been aware of that aspect of your life when you were first doing your initial consultation, when you were first meeting?
I handle that this way. I put out in my advertising, and I put out in the world that I was transgender. And so in my own mind, I said, I'm telling you that it's out there that I'm transgender. I assume I'm transgender. I did not I did not, for instance, tell people that I was a Cub Scout and not a Girl Scout. I did not advertise it. I didn't deny it. I didn't, I think people knew that, I think people knew I was gay because I did mention my girlfriend, my wife. My wife helped out in the office, and I think if you see the two of us interact, pretty much that we are wife and wife. There's no denying that. So I can't really say that someone comes into the office and said, "My name is Jill Rose Quinn and I'm transgender." I did that in my political life to a larger extent, but in my economic life, I just pretty much assumed that people either knew, and if they asked, I would certainly let them know.
And this is a personal question, but when did you and your wife actually get married?
August 28th of this year.
No, last.
Right, August 28th. Well, August 28th of 2020, We've been engaged since 2014 or so. And we during the campaign, we said we're going to get married right after the campaign. So the campaign was over on March 17th of 2020, which was right when the city shut down. So we kept on waiting to see if there was a time when the city would open up so we could have a big party. And ultimately we decided we would just do a Zoom wedding, which actually was great. We had 163 guests and we didn't have to pay for 163 plates. Works out pretty well. So we did get married on Zoom during the pandemic in August.
Well, congratulations. You're about to come up on your anniversary, so congratulations to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I had to go in that side variant. I was a poli-sci student, and hearing that your wife was your political manager, basically, just makes me chuckle. Going back to the last question, how have some reactions to people learning about your trans identity, your transition, how have those changed from the beginning of your career to where you are, the beginning of your career, the beginning of your transition to where you currently are? Have you seen any evolution in reaction once you find out who interacts with you?
All I can say in answer to that is I find people really open to me, knowing that I'm transgender. I mean, I find that, and I think that's because of how I am. I think it's a reflection. If you put yourself out there, then people are going to trust that you know what you're doing. In the last couple years, in what I would refer to as my political life, people have readily accepted me for the most part. I mean, I'm not saying that no one has ever said anything bad about me, but I tend to operate with a sort of a Pollyanna view. And if you're operating in a really nasty, crude way, you don't really want to be seen by me. So I won't look at you. Stephanie normally is there with me to make sure that they don't stick a knife in my back. But I just find that, if you don't pay attention to it, if you don't dignify it, it doesn't bother you. I just decided that a long time ago that I'm going to act with dignity, and I'm going to act proud of who I am. And it really didn't matter what other people thought if it was not what I wanted them to think.
Which is, a phenomenal answer. I mean, so for the non-attorneys in the room, the Illinois Supreme Court, just judges throughout Illinois, there's been a big push toward eliminating implicit bias, more training, just sensitizing them to minority issues of all along the spectrum. So not just sexual identity or, not just racial background, but everything else. And I was in that room while we were exchanging our notes about your candidacy. And a lot of that information is confidential. I mean, it's coming from your application, but what I was kind of getting prepared for was, some random comment from somewhere. I represent LAGBAC. So, I'm there representing the Lesbian and Gay Bar Association of Chicago on these events. And I was sitting there thinking, okay, do I have to educate anybody? Do I have to get my hackles up? I mean, I think all of us in our community, we're kind of always ready to kind of put up a shield and sword in defense of our brothers and sisters who are also a minority group. So I was kind of ready to fight. That's also the litigator in me. I'm almost always ready to kind of speak up. But what I really noticed was that there was no tension. It was just everybody saying, "Oh, I know Judge Rose Quinn, phenomenal attorney, be excellent for a judge." I think someone mentioned it, like it's time. It would be great to have that representation. But, at least in Illinois, I mean, we lead the way in so many different, elements of just equality. But in that particular regard, it was the professionalism and knowledge and expertise first. And then people were saying, and the benefit of having this representation on our bench with someone who's qualified, with a strong background and strong character is going to be immense. So just, for me to you, that was the conversation. The conversation was basically, yeah, this person is qualified. So let's move along.
Thank you so much for your comment. I mean, I can't thank you enough for what you just said. And I also can't thank you enough for participating in the evaluation process, because that's a hard job and that takes a lot. And I'm really glad that you're taking the time to help evaluate judges and make sure that competent judges are on the bench, and make sure that there's diversity. I mean, we need a more diverse bench in every possible way. The truth of the matter is that, and it took me a long time to realize this, actually, the truth of the matter is there's absolutely no reason in the world why I shouldn't have been a judge. I've been practicing law since I was 83. Since 1983, excuse me, that didn't sound right. But I've been practicing law since 1983. I've done all kinds of civil and criminal and appellate litigation. I've been in federal court. I've been in state court. I've done real estate, domestic relations, bankruptcy. Lots of different areas of law. There's no reason why anybody wouldn't vote for me. And the transgender factor was just a bonus added onto that. And I'm sure that within the next 10 years, maybe 20 years, maybe I'm being Pollyanna again, but I think that no one's going to look at it the same way that they looked at it for me. Because I think the more we're out there, the more people will see who we are and come out and participate. Like you sort of said today, and like my wife is fond of saying, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And when you were a kid and you're thinking, I've never seen any gay attorneys or gay teachers, or I've only seen gay hairdressers, and I don't want to be a hairdresser. So, but now you and your kids and my grandkids, they're going to see us in all different kinds of roles, and I think right now, for the most part, it rolls off their backs. There they are.
Which is definitely a step in the direction we want to take.
Yes.
It's kind of sad, we normalize it. So you get this element where people take some of these rights for granted, but at the same time, by normalizing it, it becomes part of everyday life. We're no longer pushed to the periphery. It's not an extra. This is not alternative. It's just, this is my neighbor. This is how they live their life. And you go about your business. And I think that's where we really want to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'll let you know, the question and answer section, the widget is blowing up. People really like the mansplaining comments. So I have a question from the audience. What else surprised you about experiencing the legal profession as a woman? And I love this question because if you're in the trans community, you have experience from one end of the spectrum to the other end. So, what did you take away? Anything stand out to you from that transition process?
So again, there was the differentiating, the different relationship between men and women. I mean, you really, there's certainly something that you have to, there's something you have to overcome in addition. You have to be a little bit better. You have to be a little smarter. I was able to express myself more as a woman, as a female attorney. In fact, I remember one time, and don't get mad at me, but I remember one time stamping my feet at a judge because he was just wrong, and I remember a few times, let my emotions free as a woman attorney, the way I never would have let free as a male attorney. I also felt like I could give more of an expression to a nurturing side. I felt like I could express more, especially domestic relations, about more of the impact on a family. There are different ways that men and women going through divorce look at look at the process, they have different goals in divorces. And I don't mean to make stereotypical assumptions, but I had seen practicing as a male attorney, I had seen both sides. Practicing as a woman attorney, I felt both sides. And I felt like I was really able to understand better where, the wife was coming from, as well as, where the husband was coming from. And I was able to more focus on, the impact on the family as it becomes two separate units instead of one unit. So again, I mean, it's, we all know how to fight oppression, or we all have experienced oppression, and there are ways to get around it. I don't think that the secret to fighting oppression is always hitting it with a big hammer. I think you can reason around it, especially in a court of law, because judges don't want to be bullied either, and they don't want to be bullied by loud male voices any more than they want to be bullied by shrill female voices. But I think as a woman attorney, I learned to more reason and use reason and emotion to win my points. And I think I related more to my clients. I felt more open. I felt like I felt less distant from my clients. And maybe I took a little bit too much home, and maybe sometimes I didn't sleep quite as well because I was worried about what was going on with the client. But that was who I was. They were my charges. They were my responsibility. I felt that more than I did before I transitioned.
Such an interesting response. I mean, I was a psych minor, technically, I guess. But what I learned from a lot of my classes were, especially going to law school, the carryover from undergrad to law school environment and then to practicing attorney. To be a well-rounded attorney, you do have to bring, both ends to it. There's the empathy component where you're really understanding what your client's end goal is. I think that still exists on the bench. You're sitting there. Does this case need to be here? What can I actually do? I mean, to the people who haven't practiced in Cook County, if you go to a high volume courtroom, such as the courtroom that deals with cooking tenants out of their homes for non-payment of rent, yes, the judges there will do their best to explain to the non-attorney, who's often pro se, no attorney representation. Maybe they Googled a little bit of it, but most of the time they're showing there and they're confused. They just got a notice in the mail. And, the judges and attorneys really do try to explain the process to them, explain their options, and explain what they can do, and give them at least the opportunity to get, attorney representation. And, I think sometimes people will hear this drive toward empathy, especially from female attorneys, as being wrong because you're now not purely objective. And I think in general, we are now seeing more of an understanding that empathy has a place in the profession, has a place in our society, and empathy not only promotes diversity, but it also drives efficiency. You know what your client wants, and you're actually working to get it versus doing what you think is right. So, I love your answer, and I think, it's going to lead to the next series of questions. I mean, there are challenges that trans people experience that we don't even really understand. Just because I'm Black and gay doesn't mean that I understand trans issues. So in a way, I'm having an adventure and a new exploration every time I talk to someone who's going through the process, wherever they may be in it. Is there a particular issue that your non-trans allies do not understand that you could, bring to light for them to be more aware of, that you think that they should know about?
Well, I don't know if anybody, non-trans allies, really get the conflict that goes on in someone's head when they're trans. And if if you read books about people who are transitioning, it's explained. It's explained a lot more effectively. But it's basically like, you decide what clothes to put on every day. But when you're trans, you kind of decide who to be every day, and that's and you look at people, and it's very hard to relate. I remember just before my transition, and I'd say in the decade before my transition, how hard it was for me to look at couples and seeing how they were relating to each other and thinking, I'm never going to have that. Even though I've been married, I'm never going to have that because I'm never going to be able to solve this conflict. So that's something I'd like people to try to understand. I don't know that they can. It's enough for me if they say that they understand that I have this. But that's central to the trans experience. It's just prior to reconciling what it's like to just not, just the conflict.
So many of us in the audience are, professionals at various organizations, both small, medium-sized to large. And I think that we are more sensitive toward the idea of pinkwashing, the idea that certain corporations will co-opt the appearance of being pro-equality and pro-minority issues just for easy points, just so that they can roll out some T-shirts and show support, gain sales instead of actually supporting some of these minority issues. So my next question is basically, we want to avoid pinkwashing, but many of us live in organization or work in organizations that may not have a member by minority group. They may not have a trans employee. It's a little bit harder to give visibility to some of these issues because we don't have a representative of that community in our workplace. How can we as LGBTQ professionals support trans rights and equality in the workplace? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, when you see a fire, put it out. When you see something that needs to be lit, light it. That would be one thing I'd have to say. I think one thing on a global level and on a political level, can't get too political, but I think we really need to look at making sure we take our best shot at getting the Equality Act passed. Because if there's one thing I know, and anybody in the legal profession knows, law is pretty slow, but law is something. The Civil Rights Act didn't make everything great for Black people, but it's there. After the Civil Rights Act, you saw a lot more visibility. You saw a lot more, African-American professionals. You saw a lot more exposure to the African-American community. I think if we have an Equality Act, and I think that it's the law of the land, that we're all equal, I think that will help a lot. And I think that on a grassroots level, I think we should take every opportunity we can to make sure that gets passed. In the state of Illinois, I think that our, in the Chicago area, we live in a bit of a bubble. I think our representatives don't need to be pushed as much. But I think, other states, I think those states have to be really lobbied to get that passed. So that's on a global level. I know that's not exactly what the question asked, but on a personal level, we should fight to get on hiring committees. We should join organizations. It's disgustingly easy to get involved in politics. You can just go online and find out when your alderman is going to have a meeting. You can go online and find out when your local chapter of the Democratic or the Republican Party or the Green Party or whatever party you choose, when they're meeting. And you can go to those meetings. And you can even participate in those meetings on Zoom. And if you go to those meetings, they'll give you something to do. And then all of a sudden you'll be in politics. And all of a sudden you'll be working on stuff. And it's the same thing on your job. It's the same thing in your community, in your church, everywhere. Get involved and just stand up for people. It feels so good to stand up for people, than it does to let an opportunity go past. You see someone, and I can use the trans community as a as an example, but let's say there's someone transitioning on the job where you work, and you hear somebody say, "Oh, I wonder if that thing is going to use the woman's bathroom." Well, stand up at the lunch table and say, "Don't talk like that. She's a person, just like you. She has a mom just like you." And again, be brave. Really, be brave.
So in some ways, misgendering somebody, the act of calling them by a term or a derogatory title, whatever, that is ignoring their preferred pronouns, their preferred identity, it's almost an act of violence. It's almost setting them up to be dehumanized in a way. And one of our members, oh, sorry.
I said I agree.
One of our members, going down, we were just talking about standing up for our trans brothers and sisters in the professional environment. One of our members is curious, what can we do to physically protect our transgendered family members? So they want to know, what can we do to help reduce the number of murders or physical violence directed against, trans people? And this is kind of related to our last discussion, but, supporting the Equality Act is something that we should do and will lead toward that direction. Then, I would let all of our members know that we should probably find a way to have our organizations champion that, get involved on the grassroots level. But do you have any thoughts on how we could prevent physical violence and start to reduce the amount of attacks against trans people?
I think the fact that we now have a law in the land that protects trans people in employment helps a lot, because it takes a lot of trans people out of those dangerous jobs which lead to violence. I think that helps a lot. I know the Chicago Police Department has liaisons with the trans communities, liaisons with the LGBTQ community. We should support efforts of organizations like that, and support efforts of government organization to do that. In our churches, in all our activities, we should just stand up for the trans people that we know. Offer to walk somebody home, and offer to have lunch with somebody, stand with somebody, communicate with somebody, show everybody that trans people, just like every marginalized group, show members of every marginalized group that they're not alone. When I was a kid, and my daughter did the same thing, if you were from a different background, I wanted to know you because you're different. I could learn something from you. I could be your friend, I took pleasure in that, and we should take pleasure in that. We should just, embrace the differences and learn about people and support other people. And I think that helps to go a long way.
And just to follow up on your response, the case that we're referring to is Bostock versus Clayton County. And we referred to this before, and if we're not, I'm going to bring it up now, a lot of our protections are not really based on actual laws. They're based on Supreme Court precedent or,
right.
Basically judicial precedent. And while we get used to hearing about these every election cycle, those aren't really as good as laws. You can overturn precedent. And, with our current makeup on the Supreme Court, even issues involving Roe v. Wade, things that we would like to think are settled, are really not. Bostock was decided last year in the midst of BLM riots and protests, in the midst of COVID raging. But it was basically established workplace protection specifically for gay and transgender employees in the workplace. But it's a Supreme Court decision. I think it was decided 6-3. So it seems like we have a majority, but it's not clear if that majority will last. We never really know what's going to happen down the line. So just to double back, on the attorney side, it does get frustrating sometimes because people will assume that the Supreme Court precedent is the same as law. It may not be. We actually do have to continue to push our legislators nationwide on the federal and state level to keep pursuing these and actually take these judicially made, these court decisions, and actually make them into laws such as the Equality Act. So I just want to make that clear in case this is any lack of clarity.
Right, and let's make it also clear that the laws don't the laws don't necessarily protect people. We've got to change society. And the societal change, it takes the hardest, is the longest and the hardest.
All right, I think we hit the last minute before we leave. I mean, we have like 60 more seconds. What has been your favorite part of your role, your career as an attorney and now as a judge so far?
I really like to get to know people and work for people and solve a problem for someone. Today in court, I quashed and recalled a warrant. What a great thing, So that's been my greatest pleasure.
All right. I want to thank Judge Quinn for joining us. I want to thank our viewers for coming. Judge Quinn, on behalf of our viewership, Thompson Coburn and Citywide Pride, thank you for your time and your honesty. I looked forward to this interview for quite a while, and I'm glad we were able to work it out. Hope you're able to enjoy your Fezziwigs, shortbread, and tea. I think the cock is finally arrived. I look forward to seeing you in the Cook County halls once the court officially opens again.
Okay. Stop by traffic court.
Will do.
Okay.
I'll be running in and out with my red weld. All right. Everyone have a great night. Judge Quinn,
thank you very
much.
You're welcome. Thank you.